Hi and welcome back to DJFonts tutorials. When you're creating titles, headlines, or logos for any application, whether it's web, print, video, or presentation, what you want to do is make an immediate impact on your reader. And today I'm going to show you 6 different tricks that you can use for creating titles that will give your reader the information that you want to give them, but in a stylish way and with priority placed on the most important words. When I create a text block or title, I like to keep my tracking on my words quite tight. And I also like to keep my line spacing or leading equally tight. That way I find that it treats the text more as a graphic element, something that is appealing to the eye but still gets the message across. And your user, your viewer, doesn't get lost in the spaces in between letters so much. Now the default values when you first type your text in the juicer almost always will need to be changed so that you can have your letters closer together and so that your lines of text are closer together. And when I tighten up text, I'll sometimes also overlap letters if there are 2 letters that have a sort of a natural larger space in between them. So that's one trick to try, is to keep your text tight together in a text block. As we saw with the previous tip, a little bit of overlap between letters is okay. In many circumstances, it won't intrude on the readability of the text, and it will keep your text a little tighter, and you can also make your text bigger when it's tighter together. But that applies not just for the kerning and tracking, but also for the leading. You can pull your text so tight together that one line overlaps on top of another. And one way to also improve the legibility of this, if it looks like it's going to be hard to read, is to add a drop shadow as well to your letters. Here's a little trick that I use sometimes. If my text is on 2 lines and I want to pull the bottom line a little bit further to the left, let's say it's a justified centered, one way is to add kerning in front of this letter, but you can't do that because there's no other letter to the left of it. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll add a space in front of my letter, and then I'll click in between the space and the first letter, and then I'll add kerning that way. It's just a little trick to move your text around on the page a little bit more easily. So here we've got 2 lines of text overlapping, and some of the letters also are overlapping on one another without actually affecting the legibility. Now I'm going to go in and add a drop shadow to that base layer, drop shadow effect. And what you want to do is you want to aim it up against the letters in the upper line. Make it nice and soft and not too strong, so lower the opacity a little bit. And if we zoom in to see that a little better, you see here I'm casting a shadow. It's subtle, but it's enough to provide that extra separation. So now we've got this nice tight title, overlapping lines, overlapping letters. We can put that same information into a smaller space, but it still has a big impact. It can also be ideal to overlap letters when you take it into Photoshop, and if you want to add a playful element to rotate your letters, then what I've done is I've imported these letters as individual characters into Photoshop, and I want to add just a playful touch to a couple of the letters. And I'm going to increase my overlap because of that. When the letters are rotated, it gives you a little bit more freedom to do that. I'm not going to rotate every letter, but I'm just going to emphasize certain letters just to make it a little bit more fun. You know, that's not going to work in every situation, but it's something that you should keep in mind because it gives you a few more options to add a playful element, add an interest to one letter or a couple of letters in your title. So that's something to keep in mind as well. It's important to remember that you don't always have to keep your letters at the same size. Some words have more importance than others and they should be played up and made bigger. So in this example here, I'm going to emphasize the word play because that's the message I want to get across, how to play with scale. So first I'm going to increase the size of play, pull it up here to the top, and the word with is really not important at all. It has to be there because it makes the phrase make sense, but it really doesn't have to have any impact. So it can be quite a bit smaller. First I'm just going to track it down, and then I'm going to make it a lot smaller. And I'm going to tighten it up with the next line by decreasing the leading. Now the third word, scale, is important, but it's not as important as play. So we're just going to increase the size of that slightly and push it to the side a little bit. And then we're going to play with the baseline a little bit on these lines. The word with I want to overlap on play. So I'm going to push the baseline up on that, and then I'm going to come to scale. I'm going to push this up here as well. So now we have 3 words in our title with different sizes, which leads the reader to assign a different importance to each word. Immediately they see play. Play is big, it's bold. In your mind you're saying play with scale. So it's kind of like modulating how somebody reads it by changing the size of the type. Because titles are really kind of a graphical element, you have a lot of leeway to break the grammatical rules of when to use uppercase, when to use lowercase. If you're creating something that's appealing to the eye, you don't have to pay attention to that unless you're working within a standards manual where you have to follow those rules. But for many titles and logos especially, you can use uppercase and lowercase interchangeably depending on where you might need it. Now, one of the reasons I use upper and lower mixed is that when I want to keep a text block nice and tight together as a unit, sometimes putting a word into uppercase makes it easier to do that. For instance, uppercase doesn't have ascenders and descenders, so you can get uppercase lines tighter together. But you don't want something big and heavy with all uppercase, so throwing in a word or two that are lowercase adds to the interest of your title. Here on the lowercase p's, those could mean that we have a big gap between our 2 lines because you don't really want to overlap 2 lines of lowercase words. It gets a little confusing to read. Here, if I delete the word lower here and pull case over, you'll see that putting the lowercase p descenders into these spaces gets kind of busy. So having the word in uppercase would solve that problem. And of course we'd also have to increase our line spacing here a little bit. But it just makes the text a little bit more readable. And that's also why I'll offset slightly to add a little bit of room either way. So now my letters are covering those descenders and everything is a little more legible to read. One way to lighten up a title and also to add some interest and contrast to it is to vary the weights of the fonts that you're using in it. Right here, this title, when we use all thick, heavy letters like these that are quite ornate, it gets a little too much and your message is getting lost in the design. So if I just get rid of the top word and the bottom word and leave the middle word and output that, I'm going to then bring that into Photoshop and I'm going to add my text, but I'm going to add simple, thin, easy to read text, and then I'm going to play with the size a little bit to make this a nice graphic element. So you don't have to use all Digital Juice fonts in your headline. Sometimes mixing something simple and thin with your decorated font gives a better message and makes it more interesting to look at. You can still do the overlapping text, emphasizing thick because that's what we're trying to emphasize, and you're also getting across your message of thick and thin by using a thinner typeface for the rest. The final trick that I use sometimes in creating titles is to shift the baseline of my characters up and down in order to fit my words together better and to add an interesting element. In this title that you see here, it looks okay, but it's a little messy and there's some space issues in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to take this word the, which is a less important word, and I'm going to scale it down. It needs to be there, as I've mentioned before, in order to make the text make sense, but we don't really need our eye to go there. So I'm going to shift the baseline of that up, and then I'm going to tighten it in on the other word, the first word, play. Already it's looking better. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this baseline word and I'm going to take all the letters except the B, and I'm going to shift those, the baseline of those, up so that my B is centered on the word. And that's already making that word look nicer. Finally, this play, which is all uppercase, it results in some ugly spaces here between the L and the A and the A and the Y. So because I have this playful title, I can increase the baseline of that letter without worrying about it being formal or following any rules, because this is a playful title to start with. And I'm just going to kern in the space between those letters. And then I'm going to come over to the P and I'm going to raise that up as well. If I wanted to do further formatting of this, I would then bring this into Photoshop and I might rotate some of these letters. But here in the juicer, I'm already making it more interesting by tightening up my title. So I'm going to increase or decrease the line spacing here a little bit. I'm going to push this part of the title over a little bit, tighten up my tracking, tighten up my kerning here, and we've got a title that now stands together as a cohesive unit. There's still a few problems that I might fix if I had a little bit more time, like this big empty space in the center here, which I could fix by rotating some of my letters in Photoshop or by shifting one of these letters up maybe, just to add a little bit more interest, and then so it doesn't look so lonely, I might shift my N up as well, and you've got something a little more interesting still. And this tip, I've used all of my tips here in this final trick, really. I've done some differences in scale, I've done shifting baseline, I've kept it tight, I've overlapped letters slightly, and I've played with the mixture of upper and lower case. So as you can see, you're always going to use one or two of these when you're creating titles, but using a mixture of them gives you something really interesting to look at. Until next time, keep watching tutorials, and I'll see you again.